Hello, I'm Dr. David Chudwin, and in my new book, The Magical Decade, I recount a number of historic events I witnessed in person between the years 1965 and 75. In this second of four videos, I tell how I watched in person the crew blast off for the first landing on the moon in 1969. I'd been interested in space since the launch of the first unmanned satellite, Sputnik 1, by the Russians in 1957 when I was 7 years old. This was the first volley in the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Russians accomplished all the firsts in space between 1961 and 65, including first man, first woman, and first spacewalk. But with Project Gemini in 1965, the Americans began to catch up. I entered the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in August 1968 and joined the staff of the Michigan Daily, the independent student newspaper there. I quickly became the unofficial space reporter for the Daily because I was practically the only staff member with any interest in science or space. Over our Christmas holiday in December 1968, my school friend Marv and I discussed going to Florida to see a Saturn V launch in person. We decided to aim for Apollo 11, which was scheduled for July during our university summer break. The Daily had a history of covering out-of-state events, usually political, but had never sent reporters to a launch. The senior editors agreed after I told them we would cover our own expenses because reporting a moon launch was not high on their list of priorities. As recounted in my book, I was a teenage space reporter. Marv and I flew to Florida on July 13th, just after I turned 19 years old. We participated in press tours of the Vehicle Assembly Building, the Launch Control Center, and the Saturn V rocket up close during the day and spectacularly at night when it was illuminated by xenon lights. On the morning of July 16, 1969, I got up at 4:30 a.m. to drive from the Sea Missile Hotel in Cocoa Beach, Florida, to the NASA Apollo 11 News Center in Cape Canaveral. It was dark, humid, and the only sounds we heard were the chirping of crickets. We boarded buses in the dark with about 200 other reporters. The buses took us through the gates of the Kennedy Space Center to a roped-off area from where the astronaut quarters and suiting up areas were located. We ran from the bus to get the best possible vantage point. Soon the astronauts in white spacesuits came to the front entrance, Neil Armstrong leading the way, followed by Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin. They waved and Armstrong gave a thumbs up as they walked down the ramp to the Astrovan for the trip to Pad 39A where their Saturn V rocket awaited. There were cheers, applause, and flashes from cameras as the astronauts and their retinue of spacesuit technicians, firemen, and NASA officials approached the van. Elbows were flying as photographers, among myself, jostled to get clear shots of the men from behind the ropes. It was all over in a few minutes, but it was one of the high points of my trip to see Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin take their last steps on Earth before heading to the moon. Marv and I watched the launch itself from a grassy area in front of the VIP grandstands. We were a little over 3 miles from the Apollo 11 Saturn V, the closest the public was allowed without risking injury or even death if the rocket exploded. The countdown went smoothly, and at precisely 9:32 a.m., a bright dot appeared at the base of the Saturn V. Flames and smoke shot out from either side of the launch pad, deflected by a series of trenches and wedges. The rocket seemed to just sit there silently until liftoff. Then the sound waves began to hit us, pounding at our chests with a thunderous roar. The Saturn V seemed to rise very slowly above the pad. As the rocket rose into the partially cloudy blue sky, we could actually feel the heat from the 5 engines producing 7.5 million pounds of thrust. The sound was overwhelming, a crackling roar. After a couple of minutes, the Saturn V was just a dot of light in the sky headed to the moon. To say experience in person the Apollo 11 launch from 3 miles away was exciting or thrilling or exhilarating would be an understatement. It was a life-changing experience for me. While Marv flew back to Chicago, I decided to stay at the Cape for the landing, which I witnessed on July 20th, 1969, at the NASA Apollo 11 News Center. Loudspeakers brought the assembled journalists air-to-ground communications and mission commentary from NASA. The last 8 minutes of the descent were perilous as computer alarms, boulders in the planned landing field, and dwindling fuel challenged Neil Armstrong. With his usual calm and experienced piloting skills, he landed the lunar module Eagle successfully. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed," Armstrong radioed. Capsule communicator Charlie Duke replied, "Roger, Tranquility. We copy on the ground. You've got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again." I had tears in my eyes thinking of President Kennedy and the Apollo 1 crew. And in the next video, I describe how I also had tears in my eyes, but not of joy. I will explain how I was saved from arrest by a dinosaur skeleton.